Hello, I am Quinny. Welcome to the channel. Guys, we are here for episode 2 of the MLS SoRare 2021 preview. I hope you enjoyed episode 1. I hope you enjoyed the intro episode with me and Surface. This episode, again, we're going through the league. We're going through all the clubs. We're talking all that stuff you'll love to hear about in terms of SO5 possibilities, about cards, fixtures, all that good stuff, guys. Massive thanks at this stage again to all the guests that have joined me. And a little footnote of an apology for any technical difficulties on some of the recording. There's just so many different things going on. Sometimes things might come through a little bit tinny. Sometimes some of the screen might be a wee bit jarring. But the audio is nice and clear pretty much all the way through. I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and make sure you stay tuned to the future episodes. We've got another 3 coming after this. Like, subscribe, share, retweet, all that good stuff, guys. And let's get stuck into it. And joining us for this part, we've got the one, the only, the SoRare USA man himself, Richard. Richard, thanks a lot for joining me, mate. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Quinny. Happy to be here. Looking forward to this. Some good previews.
Really happy to have you. You know, you'll know this already, so I've been chatting away to you. But when I was getting guys involved, wanting to do an MLS preview, I was wanting to get the biggest hitters in the SoRare community, guys that actually know MLS as much as possible. And you know, after listening to you on the pod with Hybe and You'll Never Walk Alone, I thought, brilliant, I've got another guy here that I can draft in and we can get really stuck into it. You know, we will be talking SoRare stuff, we'll talk players and average scores, and I'm sure that kind of thing will come up. But for me, and you know, I know a lot of people that interact with my content haven't really been involved in MLS before. So one of the things I'm hoping they pick up from this kind of series is like that kind of, you know, personal touch of like, if you did follow this league, those little kind of those little intricate bits of information, you know, those little feels that you'll have. Like, I don't know how much you'll know about my own MLS kind of journey, Richard, but I've kind of followed MLS on and off my whole life, you know, so I've got family over your side of the water, you know. So it's something I've always kind of had an eye on, and as times went on, especially over the last 2 years, maybe 3, I've managed to, you know, kind of get a wee bit deeper into it and everything as well. We've got 5 clubs to look through today. One of them you are a known supporter of, one of them you're a local to in terms of geography, and then we've got 3 other guys that are quite popular across the SoRare sphere for cards and players and that kind of thing. And chatting away in the prep, I think we're going to start off with the one and only, the Chicago Fire, because you're in Michigan. No, where is Chicago? Chicago's
Close. Illinois.
Illinois, sorry. Bad with states. I knew it was one of those kind of, you know, industrial, old school, you know, Ford factories kind of states, you know. So Illinois, I beg your pardon. So we're going to start off with the Fire. Richard, now for me, I'll just kind of let you know where I'm at with the Fire, and you can tell me when I'm out of date, if you like. But for me, the Fire, like, I've always been quite a big club in MLS. You know, famously recently we've also had guys like Schweinsteiger there, but if you go back to the 90s, I'm pretty sure that's who Stoichkov played for. And they've had, like, you know, some big hitters come through their doors over the years. The last couple of seasons, they've been really, really flaky in terms of results. Some teams, you know, I'm more of a New York City fan than anything else these days, and I know New York and Chicago always have big matches. It's always like 3-each draws and 4-2 wins and this kind of thing. And I think last season they were quite bad for that kind of thing as well, where they could score a couple of goals, but they could easily concede just as many. And I'm looking at the screen now. The last game they played against New York, it was a 4-3 win to New York, so that kind of proves the point. But that's the kind of my kind of perspective of Chicago. Is they're one of these older clubs in MLS that have some kind of history, longer term. You know, they're not one of the newer franchises certainly. And again, whenever I kind of have paid attention to Chicago, they're never really a boring team. They might not always be great, but they're not often boring.
Yeah, I mean, they've speaking of New York, like they played New York City in one of the preseasons, and good for them. They actually streamed it, so it's one of the teams that you know people are able to watch. Yeah, it's I don't know what it is about MLS teams, how they keep their preseason like lineups behind like closed doors. You know.
Yeah, I've noticed that. But I've noticed that with this season, like a lot of their preseason stuff seems to be like almost training ground games behind closed doors. You know, so it is weird. The thing I like about MLS a lot and SoRare, just before we get right into Chicago on that point, Richard, is that they are quite good with letting you know, injuries, likelihood of people being in the matchday squads. You know, so I remember when MLS 2020 was running, been on SoRare, and you would have a good idea of, oh, that guy hasn't even travelled to, you know, Cincinnati or, you know, in these places. And you can get a wee bit of a heads up on some DNPs, but with the pre-season, it does seem to be under lock and key. Like it's a little secret, you know. They're keeping the recipes under lock and key, you know.
Yeah, it's every team. I don't know why they do it. because you would think the ones that were that play in Champions League they would do it, but
Yeah.
anyway. So we've seen some of Chicago play New York City over the preseason, and they've played pretty good lineup. So I think they're kind of like you said, they're one of the original franchises. They've been very well, let's say average to be very generous here. Kind of middle of the pack team. I think if we look at like the betting odds, they're right in like that basically 13, 14 spots. So pretty much middle of the pack in MLS. They actually have probably the most asked Chicago Fire question is, will Bobby Shuttleworth start?
Yep.
And the answer is yes, but once Kronholm, so Kronholm is the number one in Chicago. I think he's injured his shoulder, so he's on track to kind of recover around basically the season opener. So it'll be one of those situations where there'll be a cheap keeper, maybe for 1, 2, 3 weeks, and then at some point Kronholm should take over again. There's always a chance that Shuttleworth does really well and they roll with him. So that's nice. But I think at this point, Shuttleworth he's also going for like 0.3, 0.4. So there's a lot of risk there.
Yeah. I think when guys are looking at those kind of goalkeepers, even if you're thinking Shuttleworth might get a couple of games, because he is 33, like goalkeepers, that's kind of like amongst their prime age. So if this guy does start the season, I think guys will be betting on the fact that, if a goalkeeper's in form, you don't mess about with it. If he does start, he keeps 3 out of 4 clean sheets or something like that, there might be the temptation from the management to keep him running, regardless of, any other goalkeepers, because a goalkeeper in form, I know from coaching and stuff, you just don't want to mess with it. If you've got a goalkeeper and everything they're touching is a save, then let them carry on, And in pre-season, they've kept the goals down. We were just looking at the results there. As you said, NYC, they got a 2-1 win. They got a 1-0 win over Philly as well, which is an interesting pre-season victory. And the other one, I'm just waiting for my screen to load, sorry, a 2-1 loss away to Cincinnati, or not, at home at Cincinnati, I beg your pardon, and that was at time of recording 3 days ago. So, they definitely seem to, I don't know if it's a pre-season thing, but definitely the defensive side of things, they've only conceded 2 goals in 3 games. It's a big improvement on last year, certainly. It is pre-season, so you've got to watch how much you read into that, of course. But an improvement on the defensive front is definitely something of note.
Yeah, I mean, they get back Kappelhoff, who in the past has been one of their center backs, and he was, I believe, even defender of the year 2 years ago, 3 years ago, possibly.
Okay.
So they get him back from injury last year, and in the preseason he's been playing kind of defensive midfield, and all these results are without their main center back, Mauricio Pineda, who's with the U.S. under-23 team.
Yep.
Like defensively, I think they've kept most of their starters from last year. They may have added 1 or 2 like death signings at like right back or something, but so most of the defense is returning, which is nice. In fact, most of the team overall, they've had kind of like a slow off season. The main thing they did was ship out Georgi Mihailovic to Montreal.
Yep.
So he's their number, or used to be their number 10, like from the Chicago area. It's kind of a, what do you call it, like
a homegrown.
He's a homegrown. Also, like it's kind of it's a bold move basically, because they shipped him for a bunch of like MLS allocation money, which isn't real money, but isn't also fake money. It's kind of the middle ground. So they shipped him off to Montreal, and there's no real obvious replacement. It's looking to be a mix of Stojanovic, who I don't think has a card yet on SoRare, or Fabian Herbers, who does have a card, I believe. I think he's listed as a forward. So, but he got injured. So, they've picked up a bunch of injuries. Ivanov, one of their new winger signings. Or I think his meniscus out 3 to 4 months. So that kind of takes away the depth on the.
I didn't know he was out. That new signing, they got him from somewhere. I'm just looking at the signings now. Where did they get him from? Nevsky, they actually got him from Bulgaria. So I didn't actually realise he was out with a meniscus injury. I'm just looking at their incomings now. So they've brought in a bunch of guys I don't even know. A lot of the clubs they're bringing them from. They've brought in 3 guys, and I don't know any of the clubs that they've came from, and that's John Espinoza, Chinoso Offer, and your boy Ivanov. I've not really got much of a clue who they are or where they've came from. As I kind of look at the squad overall, Richard, the 2 names that really jump out to me is Madran in midfield and obviously Beric up top. I think from last season they were big scorers, they've done really well. And most people will be looking at Chicago. Like you're talking about the betting. Okay, I've got this little graphic. I'll try and pull it up on screen for all the people at home. Yeah, I'll get this up here. So, Richard sent me this little graphic. It's to do with the betting odds in terms of likelihood. I'm just waiting for it to come up on the screen now. And Chicago, pardon me, Chicago, where are Chicago? I was going to say DC because we were having a laugh about them. But where are Chicago?
Chicago's like right in the middle.
We're right in the middle, okay. So,
point 3 something.
Yeah, not very likely to do well in MLS Cup or whatever, but they're definitely not down in bottom place, and that is a big part down to the fact that they've got a guy like Robert Beric who is a goal scorer, and a lot of guys will look at I think MLS is such a big division that when you're coming into it as a SoRare manager, especially a new SoRare manager, Richard, the temptation is to look at LAFC and Columbus and Portland and all these guys, but a lot of their big players are very expensive. So what most people will do, this is what I could imagine myself doing if I was in such a position, is you go down the tree, you go down and you're looking to unearth those gems and find those players that, they might not score 20 this season, but if they score 8 to 12, I'm happy. And this guy's average score isn't 60 plus, it's 50 plus, that works for me too. That kind of thing. So I think a lot of people will get drawn to Chicago Fire because they've kept their manager from the same year. And like I was saying with Madran and with Beric, they've got two guys there that are European, which I know will help a lot of SoRare managers kind of justify the price tag, and the standing that they hold within the team and within the league. Is there anyone that you would maybe earmark for us as a potential, air quotes, next Beric or Madran type SO5 scorer?
I'd say I think I like Madran a lot. Beric too, if he wasn't maybe a little bit cheaper, but I think for the same price you can get Rui Diaz or Zardes even.
Oh really?
Currently. But Madran is great value. Kind of the new cards to look out for. I'd say Ali Seda, he's the winger on the other side of Frankowski.
Yep.
And then maybe Jimenez. He's like the number 6 sitting in front of the deep. Well, number 6 or number 8, depending on how they line up. But again, those central midfielders pick up solid points and might not be a flashy card to own, but could be, quality like 50 to 60 every week.
Yeah. I liked what you were saying about Kappelhoff as well, the fact that he's playing midfield, because you do get some of those cheat code guys, and a defender that's playing midfield. That it's not overly ideal because being listed as if he's not got a card, has he yet? I don't think. I don't recognise him from SO5.
Kappelhoff does.
Oh, he does.
So you can actually get him for like 0.05.
Really?
Somewhere in that range currently, which is pretty good. And he might also slot back in the center defense, which would be, that'd be ideal, right?
Yeah.
So Pineda plus Kappelhoff.
So I'm just going to pull him up on screen now, Kappelhoff, because if he's a defender, if he's listed as a defender and he's playing midfield, the kind of bad thing about that is the clean sheet loss element, whereas if you're a midfielder, there's a guy, I don't know if you're familiar with this guy, he plays in Belgium, his name's Bocadi. He's listed as a midfielder, he scores very well, and the reason he scores very well is he plays in a back three, he plays centre back, so you don't actually lose any clean sheet penalties for him or whatever, but he gets all the passes from the goalkeeper and all that kind of thing. So Kappelhoff is kind of the opposite of that, but it can, in terms of the pass completion, the key passes for a defender that a lot of defenders won't, if he's in midfield, he's more likely to get some of those contributions that an out and out centre back won't. So that does strike me, especially the price you quoted there. I'm just checking them out. But yeah, you can get him for about 0.1 is his best price on the secondary market. But I suspect if you were 21 hours ago and 2 days ago in the primary, he's going for about 0.04, 0.05 as you said. So yeah, 29 years old, that could be a really solid card for some guys for sure. Boom. Sorted. So the first team we're going to be chatting through, Surfish, you've got a lovely slideshow for us to go through, but the first team we're looking at is Nashville. Everyone in is the hashtag. So Nashville last year, it was their first year in MLS, and they actually did really well, surprised a lot of people. What was your thoughts on Nashville?
I mean, they were one of the most interesting teams in MLS. Perhaps not the most exciting to watch unless you love defense. But I mean, they had a philosophy that they basically used to acquire their players before the season started. And, they stuck with it and it worked. I mean, I think they did better than anyone was expecting. It was a great first year for them. And I know there's a lot of excitement around the team. And it'll be interesting to see how they do. I think they're one of the most interesting MLS SoRare teams because of their defensive philosophy. I mean, they really are the epitome of, park the bus, so to speak.
Totally.
So, I mean, I put the slideshow together. I spent 20, 30 minutes yesterday just to help me, with my notes and stuff. But yeah, I think that they're going to be interesting to watch this year because they could be, one of the teams that have a couple of good, especially on good matchups, have a couple of good potential options for defense. And obviously, they're going to coming in with Zimmerman and Willis as the backs at the spine, which were, basically the number one combo last year. So it seems like they're primed to, do it again. Can Zimmerman win Defensive Player of the Year again? That's an interesting question. So, okay, they finished 7th in the Eastern Conference, and they lost in the conference semis. I cannot remember who they lost to, but they were 24th in goals for and third best, or tied for 25th in goals for with 24, and in goals allowed, they only got 22, third best. So, clearly a great defensive team. So this year, the major change they added were Pinheiro and Sapong, and that's kind of the big question mark is like, who's going to play up front for them? It seems like so far it's been a revolving door. It's kind of going to have a revolving door approach. They've had, I don't know if you know, but they had most of their preseason games canceled because of COVID. They played one a few weeks ago against a USL team. I think a Florida team. I'm not totally sure. But a lot of the starters weren't ready, didn't play yet. So it's still kind of unclear who's going to be playing up top.
Wow. Okay.
So this is taken from a spreadsheet. I cannot remember who the source is, but it's somebody that Laird with Roto World shared with us. And it's, potential, depth chart as far as, what's heading into the season. Have you seen this before?
It doesn't. I've seen a depth chart before. I don't recognise this one in particular. Sorted. So you've got a lovely depth chart here for us, Surface, to have a look at when it comes to Nashville. Like you were kind of saying there, they have been the pillars of defensive solidarity, which in an SO5 situation can reap a lot of rewards quite predictably, you would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, they have quite a bit of strong options for combos. I mean, obviously the Willis Zimmerman, as mentioned, was the number one goalkeeper defensive combo, by far last year. It's really strong. And if you want to go second defensive player, I'd Lovitz. It seems like Lovitz and Zimmerman score better than Romney did last season.
Yeah.
Seems like they get more of the touches. So they added Pinheiro and, as a forward on the right, and there's no cards in him from last year, unfortunately. And, of course, we don't know what the situation is going to be for when they introduce the new cards. Is it going to be the MLSPA or not? Is it going to be, hopefully it's everybody. I mean, that was kind of very strange, but he could be one of the best offensive options. But the bottom line is they're just not an offensive team. I mean, they were tied for first with 9 clean sheets last year at a 39% clip. But, as mentioned, they did not score a lot. They did not take a lot of shots.
No.
I like in the middle, I like Godoy. He seems to have the most kind of, offensive, potential as far as, also just controlling the ball and, potentially the highest upside in my opinion. So those are kind of the cards, I've been targeting. So one of the things is position battles, and, it seems like in the back it's pretty set, and it really is going to be up front. Who's going to be playing, the number 9? And they have a huge range of players. How is Sapong going to get in there? I don't think they just got him for no reason. Where's he going to fit? And then on the left, I've been reading that it seems like it's, a battle between Leo and Buana for primary duties. So that'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Now, looking at the schedule a little bit, they have potential holes as far as international play. I mean, Godoy left last year. Alistair Johnson, Leo, and then Zimmerman, could be gone for international play too, it seems like. So That's something to keep an eye out for when you're kind of planning, especially for that, prime midsummer MLS period. October, they got a killer slate. They got some tough matchups. They played New York, Columbus, and Philly in a pretty close stretch, but they opened the season with some of the potentially easier teams. So they could be, getting out to a good start.
No, totally. I think with Nashville, it is very much a form-based kind of situation that, these defensive teams that do really well, they do really well because they get lots of and I don't mean this in terms of 3 points on a match day, but they get lots of little wins very often. You know, they keep a clean sheet for the first couple of games. They concede less than 5 corners. These are the things that gets these kind of coaches and teams buzzing, you know, and really reaping off that kind of success. So they finished really last season really strong. And when you do look at the team, they do have a lot of options, but my kind of perception of that surface, and I don't know what yours might be, but that kind of tells me they're not really got a clear idea of how they move on offensively. So it's just kind of stack up on extra players and maybe something will just kind of work itself out. That's kind of the impression I get. I'm actually really excited after watching him last year to see what Randall Leal does. I know you're saying he's in competition with Boana there on the left, but Leal last year, when I seen him, he was electric. He's so quick on the ball, he's rapid, he's got a tidy finish about him as well. And along with Mukhtar, these guys towards the back end of last season surface, and I'm sure you'll agree, they seem to get into a nice attacking rhythm on the counter attack. And if they can bring in lots of those little small W's, like, you know, from match play rather than the match itself, I think they could. They've got the fixtures there. They could do well. You know, they could start the season strong. And with the opposition they have, it's not just 3 points you get; it's massive confidence boosts also.
Yeah, I mean the idea when they built the team was to start with the defense. It worked in year 1. They are trying to increase the offense in year 2. How is it going to happen? It's exactly like you said. To me, that actually is interesting because it could go both ways. It doesn't see it's hard to have a top shelf defense every single year to year in MLS. It's just not like other regions where there's a little bit more variance. I mean, look at teams that were top defenses 2 years ago versus last year. It's just things happen, injuries happen, of course. So if they don't have the top shelf defense, you know, they could be taking quite a bit of a step back. Actually, we'll see if the offense doesn't pan out. Yeah. They're right in the middle. They had a great first year. It'll be exciting to see, you know, what they do in year number 2.
In terms of guys that don't have cards, I think the only one I see on your depth chart that I have in my like to buy list, or I'm not really that excited that I need to get him day 1, but someday I will buy at some point, is, I don't know how to say it, but it's Moyle, Muyl. He's the guy, he's a backup right winger. Can't remember why, but I know he's on my list. I've seen an article about him somewhere or whatever, so he's probably the only, I think he's a young guy, so I think he's one of my young interests in this team. Otherwise, sorry, you go.
Yeah, he's interesting. They also have this guy Jack Marr. He's he was second in the 2020 super draft. Their second pick overall, but he doesn't have a clear path to playing behind Zimmerman. Yeah. But he's a pretty interesting, highly touted prospect for sure as far as long term goes.
100%. And Nashville, if they ended up in the playoffs this year, I don't think anyone would be surprised. But I think kind of me and you seem to both agree, it's not going to be through attacking flair and talent. It's going to be through strategic, tactical, methodical performances.
Yeah, I agree. Unless somebody emerges up front, but
CJ Sapong scores 25 goals and causes a riot.
I think 7th in Eastern Conference is actually, could be right where they're at again, or potentially 8th or 9th.
The thing with the thing with the Eastern Conference is there is always scope for 2 or 3 teams to get in there that is wide open, if you know what I mean. Like when I've followed MLS in the past, I know you followed it really heavily last year. That the West Coast has got like your Seattles and your Galaxies and LAFCs and all this type of stuff, but in the East it's kind of been like Toronto, and that's one of the only real certainties. New York recently, the Bulls had their time, but there's always 2 or 3 spots that are wide open that could be a few different teams, and I make you quite right. You would put some safe money on Nashville being one of those teams come into the season, because defensively they're not going to get beat 5-0. They're not going to get bent over by a team that comes knocking.
The reason why I think they could be 9th or 10th, to be honest, is because looking at the top teams, I still feel they're pretty strong. I mean, Philly, Toronto, Columbus, Orlando was a big surprise. New York could have some issues, but looking at the bottom, I feel like actually the bottom 5 really got stronger. I mean, Miami got better as the year went along to some degree, but Atlanta should be better this year. Yeah. And DC's been traditionally pretty good. It had a really off year, and I think there's kind of also unanimous consent that Cincinnati's got better too. So I would not be surprised to see them out of the top 8, to be honest.
That will be down to a lack of goals, because the teams you just listed there have more firepower on their books, in terms of recognised, Atlanta aside, even Cincinnati bringing in Atlanta Brenner, New York could do with another striker or two, right enough, but it will be firepower, I think, that split these teams. You know, who scores the most, who wins the most matches, because defences are great, but they don't win matches. They just stop you losing.
Big news, really.
Yeah, I think when most people kind of look at Montreal, Jihad, like for me especially, when it was, see when we were in December, and you know, I was anyway, you probably were to some extent also, kind of prepping for MLS 2021. When I was looking at Montreal, I was thinking, right, Henry is trying to shape a squad. You know, you probably remember that viral clip of Henry on the touchline. You know, where you can hear him talking to the players mid-match, and he's like telling them to go quicker. You know, all the kind of instructions he was giving over. So I actually had a good bit of faith in Montreal coming into this season. I thought they've got a plan. They're building a team. They brought in guys like Georgi Mihailovic, Mason Toy in the January window. So I had a lot of faith in them. So the kind of upheaval of losing the kind of, you know, the figurehead, if you like, of the maybe the short-term operations, maybe not the longer term. So I'm sure they've got directors of football and that sort of thing. It does put a big question mark across the squad now for me, because someone comes in fresh. Do they adopt the same plan? Do they maybe alter it? Do some of the guys that have been brought in to be key players now become secondary? You know, so there's a few question marks across Montreal this season. Would you go along with that, Jeremy?
Yeah, as much as obviously they're our big rival here from Toronto, I'd agree. Like, I've always had tremendous respect for Thierry Henry. I thought he'd be excellent, you know, to either motivate the squad or actually give them some semblance of some balance. I know that Matej is another kind of Canadian fan who's big on Montreal, and you know, I used to tease him because it's like, it looked like every time last year that Montreal was assembling a lineup, you might as well just like throw darts at a dartboard and like, you know, like I was like, you might as well just put the defenders as forwards and maybe throw in a midfielder and a goalie, because I was like, they had no idea what they were doing with that squad. Like, it was like laughable. Like, yeah. Great as a TFC fan, because I'm like, they had no idea what they were doing. But you're right, it seemed like they are actually kind of coming around a bit. And yeah, I read some articles about Thierry Henry, and I know that last year, well, for a lot of us, the pandemic was difficult. So I think, you know, even motivating players, getting them, you know, like they're totally removed from their families. I don't know, many people might not realize a lot of the Canadian teams were actually playing in the United States because of like quarantine issues. So people wouldn't see their, you know, family for months and months on end. And then he just left. And then I don't know how much, like, I know their assistant coach, you know, he's solid, but, you know, does Wanyama like have a resurgence at this team now, right? Like, do some of the players who probably came because of Thierry Henry, like this Arsenal legend, kind of like, you know, does that kind of kill the dressing room, I guess, is what I'd wonder.
Yeah, definitely. Wanyama's a card I've been waiting very long for it to come, being a Celtic fan. I quite like, similar to you picking up your Canadian cards, I quite like picking up Celtic related cards, you know. So Wanyama's a bit of a cult hero at Celtic, so I've been waiting for that card to come. The main kind of questions, see what you were saying there in terms of like their formation and their positioning and all that kind of stuff last season was all kind of over the place. One guy that benefited from that massively on SO5 was Romel Kyoto, who is listed as a midfielder. Henry was playing him up front a lot, and if you look at this guy's SO5 scores, they were amazing, because being a midfielder and the way Henry was playing him, certainly anyway, when he was playing him up front, was a very high energy, high pressing. He was a midfielder playing up front, you know, basically, you know, and that translated really well into SO5 scores. His price on the market does reflect that, but what his price doesn't reflect is what's going to happen this year, because is he going to play up front? Is he going to play in midfield? What's the formation going to be? What's the philosophy going to be? You know, so players like that, like I kind of said at the tip off of this, there's a big question mark over, you know, what are you getting in SO5 from some of these guys, you know, because Kyoto could be one of these kind of red herrings where you open him up, you look at his last 5 and his last 15, you're like, wow, over 60 on both of them. You know, this guy's a player, but what you don't know is that he was playing up front, you know, and they might not play up front because they've just signed Bjorn Johnson in from the K-League, you know, Champions League winner over there. They've got Mason Toy, who's a highly thought of youngster. And they also brought in Herrick Hurtado, who is like an MLS veteran of sorts, you know, so Kyoto probably doesn't figure up front anymore, probably, you know, who knows, time will tell on that one. But yeah, so that you can get some beneficiaries of this kind of, you know, sometimes when things do get turned upside down and the defenders are playing as the wide forwards and the midfielders playing as the centre back and these types of things, but you do need to be careful that there is some narratives going on with some of those situations longer term, that you might buy something and realise it's not what you thought it was, so do tread carefully on that kind of front. In terms of up front, they do seem to have a lot of firepower. Do you think we're going to get a lot of goals out of Montreal this year?
Yeah, no, just getting back to what you were saying there, I think you're totally right about Kyoto. Like I picked him up knowing that he has that offensive ability, and I also sold him on that high. So I'll be perfectly honest and transparent. Like, he won me probably multiple prizes, and I thank him for that. But when I looked at that roster, I'm like, because again, I spent a year in Korea, so I saw that Johnson came in from Ulsan. I think they'll use him as their number 9. The one thing as well in MLS is having a consistent kind of, especially fantasy point scoring midfielder is key. And I know Ty Dare was amazing, but then when he moved, I'm just glad I didn't jump on that bandwagon, because I knew how much talent he's on the same level as Pozuelo, really, putting up stats.
Yep.
But then that's the problem. They get snapped up, especially by Saudi and that. Any of these clubs that aren't on Opta, it kills the valuation. So you do need to be worried about that. And I was going to say, I think Ty Dare's replacement, and I'm hoping, because I have him, it might be Mihailovic. He's the young under 23 possible future star. But I don't but does he work with I don't know how he works with Wanyama, who's their designated player. There's still a lot of question marks with that team, but compared to say Vancouver, lots of potential. So as much as I loathe to say that about Montreal, I don't know, there's definitely players I would put on my squad there. I know Diop in net should. It's tricky. Similar to the Vancouver goaltending situation, you think that Crépeau and Diop would be the surefire starters to begin the year at least.
Yep.
But I will say this: I don't know if anyone had a chance to watch Canada. No one will probably watch this. Canada, Mexico, under 23, Olympic qualifying. I like how I preface that with so no one's watching that other than me. But anyways, the keeper though, I think it's Pantemis.
Yep.
He was outstanding. You're talking about Mexico, the kind of team that can actually win Olympic gold. So they're not a walkover. They're really strong. This kid was coming out strong all the time, and he's probably their second or third option. I don't know. I think that guy could be starring in 2026 for Canada. And if they have him as a solid goalkeeper and add in all that offensive power, not saying they'd go far in the World Cup, but they'll definitely give teams a run for their money. So I know that now that being said, I think Diop's the right player for now, and lots of potential there in that squad.
I know what Henri liked about Diop was the ball playing he can do with his feet. Whenever I actually by chance ended up watching Montreal maybe 2 or 3 times last year, just because they played New York so often. I watch a lot of NYC. And Diop did play very similar to Sean Johnson. If you watch New York or if you've seen Sean Johnson, he's very good with the ball at his feet. Diop I found to be quite similar. And you can see that in his SO5 scores. Even without clean sheets, he can still get some oranges. And I think all his greens, Montreal didn't get that many clean sheets. Yeah, so he's got green scores, even with DC scoring 2 goals against them. I'm just looking at some games here. A 2-1 win at New England. He still scored 60 points with no clean sheet. So that's a guy that makes saves, makes passes. So it's a very good goalkeeping option. In terms of Wanyama, I do make you right. He started off really well. He's not got a card yet, and I'm really very much looking forward to him coming on. Someone else that ticks that box for me is Louis Binks. So I know from watching Montreal a couple of times, it was very much. He's not coming up on SoRare data for me. Oh, Louis Binks. It's LUIS, isn't it? But he's an English centre back, and he did very well last year. He's not got a card. Louis Binks. I always type in Blinks. I don't know why. Binks. Louis Binks. Sorry, beg your pardon, guys. So he's not got a card from last year, so you're looking for his card for next year. There's his scores. They're all fairly average-ish and consistent. A couple of greens, mainly orange, a couple of red. But he's a guy that got some plaudits last year, you know, playing as a centre of a back three, and you know he seemed, or was he on left side in fact, but he seemed to do pretty well this year. Is he somebody you managed to did you notice Louis Binks at all last year, or you got any thoughts on him?
Well, yeah, well, I thought that especially the European kind of market might know him better, right? Because you know, people might have followed his progress at some point. Because what is he? He's English, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, but yeah, I found that without a card, it's already kind of tricky. Like that's the one thing about MLS is that, and we'll mention it when we talk about like TFC, but like Richie Larea was amazing last year for TFC, but never got a card. And I kind of mentioned that, and I know SoRare's done actually a great job of trying to like ask for fan opinion about who should we include. And the tricky part about MLS is because you do get players poached by, you know, I guess in the past China, the Saudi League, even Europe, right? That like sometimes you have players who, you know, they come and go so quick that they don't even get a card, and then you also get some that could easily slip through the cracks, right? So I think that's one to kind of put on a watch list to see kind of what will happen. But again, I'm always a little wary of the European players because they tend to command high prices, but they're probably playing in MLS for a reason. So yeah, again, not to dismiss the league because I enjoy it, but I find that anyone moving from Europe to MLS should be a little bit of a red flag. Obviously, with like if we're talking about Rooney or Ibrahimovic, that's one thing, but you know, for defenders, etc., I don't know. I guess time will tell.
Yeah,
and again, good to like kind of scout some of these players on the market, and I think you can actually like, you know, star them for the future as well, right?
Yeah, totally. I'm actually just looking. I've got a wee bit of. I think I may have a wee bit of egg on my face. It looks like Louis Binks was on loan from Bologna, and by all accounts on the website I'm on, anyway, it looks like he's returned to Italy from his loan spell.
Oh.
So
I guess that's
to be confirmed, I suppose.
Yeah, I noticed the same thing. I didn't. That's the tricky thing too, right? I don't know. Yeah, who has his rights, which is actually true of like that's the one thing I kind of told everyone to kind of be wary of with MLS because I know that everyone kind of was like, oh, it's like Jihad, you seem to be this MLS guru, but I'm like, I don't even know who's starting for my hometown team. Right? You have a new coach, etc. So it's like I told most people, I'm like, why don't you just wait till April to see who makes the squad?
Yeah.
Because I know, you know, people go on loans. Perfect thing is like Daryl DK to like Barnsley, right? Like who like lit it up for that team, and then you have also, you know, players that leave like Donnell Henry, who went, you know, from MLS to K League.
Yep.
Did really well some weeks, and then gets injured like half the time. So it's tricky, right? Like these players are moving around so much, and a lot of them are using either MLS as a stepping stone, or they're using it as a retirement, or they're using it to regain fitness. So you really have to be kind of smart about it, right? Because it's like they all have their own motivations, right?
Yeah.
I know if I was them, I'd much rather like, you know, play for Inter Miami or like New York FC than I would like get harassed by a bunch of fans in like Turkey or something like that. Again.
Yeah, well, I'm with you. I was just actually about to say the same thing. I find that, out of just again my kind of perspective from the outside looking in, but it seems to be you get a lot of kind of Europeans now, or maybe even just non-North Americans, because you included South American in this breath, I suppose, that are moving there, and it is for lifestyle more. It's like it is kind of like you say. It's like, why go play in Belgium where I can go and play in Miami? You know, why go play in, you know, Ecuador when I can go and play in Cincinnati, you know, or you know, whatever it might be, you know, it's standard of living. And I think we're talking about with one of our teams, it's kind of like, it's what their motivation is as a player, you know, when they get into a squad. I think a lot of people, a lot of guys we'll see coming to MLS over the next couple of years, and we've seen coming recently also, guys like Pato and whatever, is they maybe just realise that this is kind of like their level, and it's like the best place to be at this level, you know, like, let's say on world football terms, MLS is like a 6 out of 10. Well, what other leagues are 6 out of 10 that are as nice a place to live as like a Miami, or, you know, a New York, or even an Austin or something like that, you know? So I think you're getting some people that are going for quality of life as much as quality of competition, which is...
Yeah, no, I was going to piggyback on that and say, I totally have seen that. I know, so Giovinco was really like a legend in Toronto here.
Yeah.
And I believe his family still has a property in like the GTA, like the Greater Toronto area. He went to Saudi, but now I think really wants to come back. But again, he's at the tail end of his career, and now Toronto really kind of moved on by picking up Pozuelo, right? Like there's no real space for him anymore. And you can kind of get a sense that, especially during this pandemic, right? Like Toronto is a very, like, yes, it's extremely cold here in the winter, I will say that. But it's an extremely like international city. You can get cuisine from like anywhere, right? Like,
it's very welcoming.
Yeah, like it's more open, peaceful, right? Like it's a pretty good gig here, to be honest with you, other than the winter. And the same thing happened with Victor Vasquez, who was like playing for Barcelona B, maybe got a couple starts at the A club for Barcelona, came to TFC. He was really like that kind of non-designated player, but one tier down, like really good, talented guy. And yeah, he got poached by, just went for the big money, and now he's playing in LA with Greg Vanney again, right? So I mean, I think a lot of people realize that like, it's not a bad gig to make, 500 grand, $1 million, and be playing in Chicago, Seattle, right? Like Vancouver. These are all like amazing cities. And again, people won't like hound you on the street, right? They're not going to be like, firing flares off. There's no fights in the stands and stuff like that, right? Like, it's pretty low key here. I know like supporters will like it's not the same. And I mean,
especially when you go to like South America, or like I'm in Glasgow, as you know, and even here, like I live really close to where Celtic and Rangers both train, for example. So like Glasgow's a small place, and when you've got really intense rivalries, some people just aren't about that. They're just like, that's between you guys. I'm just here to play football. So
well, I think TFC is like training at Disneyland right now. So I mean, like I'm not even kidding either. I think they're actually playing at that World of Sports or whatever it's called there.
Oh, wow.
And who can turn that down? It probably has like, I don't know, like 15 soccer pitches in a row, beautiful weather. I guarantee those TFC players walk into the streets in like Orlando, no one knows who they are, right? Like, There's something nice to be said about that. It's fun to get all the glamour of, European football, but like you said, like I would take Inter Miami over like, I was gonna say Club Brugge, but that's kind of putting them down. They're actually a good squad. But but again, like, I don't know, you really want to be playing on the 17th best team in like Spain?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
I know, I'm with you. I would be the same, Now that takes us on to probably my most hated team in MLS, and that is the New York Red Bulls. Now the Red Bulls, historically, are a massive club in MLS, from previously being Metro Stars and all the rest of it. But the last year or two has been a big period of transition. They've not been doing too well. New managers come in. Brad Struber is very much a Red Bulls kind of guy. They expect him to be plug in and play, I suspect. But we're going to start off with the goalkeepers. Now, most people, again, when you're shopping around MLS, you're looking for those clear-cut number one goalkeepers. I don't really see that in the Bulls. It's been really a lot of upheaval and a lot of speculation. Is there anything really clear-cut in that respect from you, Andrew?
No, I don't think there's any clear-cut anything, unfortunately. We saw Ryan Mira. I know people were buying him up as if he was going to be the starter. And then, they brought this Carlos Coronel in from Salzburg. He's on loan. He has already had an unsuccessful stint in MLS, so I'm kind of surprised that they're giving him another. But it would seem weird to get a guy from Salzburg and then not play him. So I think, unfortunately, we don't have his card to speculate. Although maybe that's actually saving us from ourselves in that respect. But yeah, it's kind of a situation. I'm not sure they're going to be that good anyway. So I don't know how many Red Bull goalkeepers I even want to invest in, given the price you have to pay for even poor goalkeepers these days.
Yeah, I'm with you there. As I say, I'm not a big fan of the Bulls anyway. I'm a bit biased in that respect. But as we move into the defence now, we're looking for solid fullback, solid attacking fullbacks, solid central defenders that lead the line. There is two names in this team that jump out, in Kyle Duncan and Aaron Long. But otherwise, there's not really much in this defence that really does inspire from an SO5 perspective. You know, Aaron Long's been there and done that. He's quite a trusted, reliable centre-back, and Kyle Duncan's up and coming, and, you know, with that whole Red Bull infrastructure, could be somebody that moves on in the future. But it's a very thin defence. It doesn't really strike a lot of confidence in me. I'm not looking at them and seeing a lot of clean sheets or a lot of assists and goals coming from the fullbacks. When it comes to the Red Bulls defence, Andrew, where is it you look?
Yeah, I mean, Aaron Long is probably the one that you want if you just want to focus on SO5 points. And Duncan is probably the one you want to focus on if you want to make money on a specific card. Like Duncan, I think there's a possibility that he could leave. I mean, he's young enough and he's starting and playing in MLS that, and particularly when you have a club like the Red Bulls that just feed players to the other Red Bull clubs like Salzburg and Leipzig, then someone like Duncan could always leave. But I think Duncan probably offers the most utility just because you can play him in multiple competitions, unlike Long at least. But yeah, I think the back line is like, they're fine. Duncan probably has the most financial upside for those who buy his cards. And then, Gutman and Long, I think, will actually be able to give you the points.
Now, they've made some transfers. They've brought some guys in from other MLS clubs. They're hoping they can just kind of plug in and play. Like you were saying there with Gutman, we were chatting about Reyes earlier on. So they're making these kind of moves. They're going back to type in the sense that they're sticking to the Red Bull philosophy. They're trying to get guys that maybe on paper tick the boxes in terms of how many miles they run, their successful passes and touches. As a New York City guy, I'm not really that excited to see them do that well. And I'd be quite happy to see them suffering and kind of floundering a little bit. But, you know, where are you at with the Bulls in general?
I think the only thing that I hesitate with the Red Bulls is I'm not sure the players are as good as the ones that we've seen in the past years where they've always made it work. Like they have a few names that, like, you know, you can get behind, but I'm not sure, I'm overly excited about really any of them that I'm like, oh, I got to go get this guy, because other than the Red Bulls trust him, I don't have like other reasons of why I should buy a card. And I'm not sure I'm ready to put my hard-earned money into trusting the Red Bulls coaching. I hate to describe them as they're just kind of a bunch of guys, but that's kind of how I look at them. I had kind of used that phrase sometimes with, these players exactly fitted, like their names, and if anybody else was in that spot, you'd just be like, okay, he's just as good. Like Florian Velo on the right side, took some set pieces last season and is one of those guys who actually doesn't have that great of a floor in terms of fantasy points, but anytime you can get somebody with set pieces, usually that, you know, you can get lucky on any set piece. So I think you can look at that. Daniel Royer is definitely their most consistent attacker in terms of actually attacking as much as possible. And so I think those are the two that I would focus on. They have Brian White, who I think if he was, I think he's still U23. But if he wasn't, I don't think anybody would have any interest in him. The MLS U23 pool is so small that, when we have somebody who fits it, you're like, oh, well, I have to go get him because nobody else, because there just aren't that many of them. But he's like a lot of forwards. He's just very, very goal dependent. And he happened to get on the score sheet enough towards the end of the season that he has some good green scores, but I'm just not sure. He might lose his U23 now that I see that, if he even is at this point.
The interesting thing about that is in MLS and in the J League, because of the kind of structures that those countries operate with, there is a real lack of under 23 like talent, especially in forwards.
Well, MLS has a lot of U23 players that are going to lose their U23 eligibility this summer. So that's just really, if you buy a U23 player, you got to really watch out, because there are some that the card said their last card says 22, but they turn 24 on June 30th, and you just missed the July 1st cutoff. So U23 tournaments this summer are going to be very different after July 1st, because we just lose a ton of players in MLS, at least because they hit that age threshold.
And again, when we're looking at MLS clubs, what a lot of guys will do, especially the novices, they'll try and find just who's the DP, who's meant to be the best player, who's the highest paid player on the roster. And the Bulls are really lacking in that respect. Obviously, had a bit of an ordeal with one of their DPs in the last season, but we would expect that they'd maybe try and bring in someone. You know, they're very famous for DPs in the past with guys like Cahill and Henry and whatnot.
Yeah, they had this weird situation with Kaku, who his real name is Alejandro Romero, but he signed with a team in somewhere in, I don't know if it was Saudi Arabia, but one of the clubs that we all hope none of our players go because they're not scored by Opta. He basically signed with them with the belief that the Red Bulls let him go last year, and the Red Bulls disagree with his interpretation of that. And I believe I saw literally this morning that FIFA agrees with the Red Bulls and that he might have to go back, or he probably won't go back, but he's still under contract with them. And so, I mean, if he comes back, he was he took all of their set pieces when he was there. He's an exciting player. I can't imagine he's clearly not excited to go back, or else he'd be there already. But that's just one thing to watch out for, because there are cards of his out there, and there is this much chance that he could go back, and that team gets a little more interesting if he does go back.
So the Bulls, they're going to be pretty shit this year, Andrew. Do you want to say anything else?
As a New York City FC supporter, I would prefer to not have to talk about them anymore.
I'm with you there. And then we come on to Dallas. Okay, so Dallas did really well last year. I think a lot of SoRare users, Martin, have kind of fallen in love with Dallas because they're really happy to export their talent into Europe as much as anything else. They do have a lot of exciting prospects coming through, but again, quite similar to a few of the other teams we've been talking about, they're one of these teams that are built upon a good academy kind of philosophy, a good kind of club ethos, and a club like that can offer relatively consistent performances. How do you see Dallas actually panning out this year, Martin?
There's a lot of question marks for me. I'm kind of a little worried about them. They have some young players. Obviously, you never quite know what you're going to get from those players. Like Testament is going to be they just sold Santos back to Brazil, so I think that opens up the door for Testament to come in that kind of central midfield. Obviously, they got Pomacau, who's coming off a pretty serious injury, so he's got good talent. But again, coming from a serious injury like that, you kind of never know how the player's going to come back. They have like another young defender in Nelson. So they have a few young players in there. So I mean, there's a lot of like variables that could happen with this team as well. I mean, I don't think they're like an elite level team anymore. I think they're more a team that's going to be like fighting towards the lower kind of playoff places for me. Solid defensively, I'd say. They got like Mora, who's a pretty strong MLS goalkeeper. Matt Hedges, pretty decent centre back. Collins Head, the same. So I mean, they lost a couple of players. So I mean, I think they'll be okay. I just don't think they're like. I don't expect how Dallas used to be from them. I think they've taken a step back from the prior Dallas teams.
Well, Matt Hedges is probably one of the best defenders in MLS from a SoRare perspective. When you look at, I'm looking at his SO5 now. There's like 3 reds, a ton of high greens, and a lot of high oranges. So even though the colours do jump out at you when you look at SoRare data, but the level of where because it's also a banding green, orange, and red. But if all the scores are at the top of each kind of category, it does, when you do come across a player like that, it does strike you. You do notice it. And Hedges is a really commanding centre back. He can pass the ball. He's very good in recovery situations as well. But one guy you said there, Hollingshead, I actually think he didn't get as much of the limelight last year from a SoRare angle that he maybe should have, because of guys like Reynolds and Cannon and maybe even Hedges. But Hollingshead at left back was really strong. I mean, you look at his SoRare scores; they were incredible last year. And the kind of price he's hovering around now, just over a quarter of a coin on the secondary market, is quite commensurate with a really good, proven attacking fullback like Hollingshead. Beyond that, Paul McCann, like you just mentioned there, I heard on a podcast last week that Dallas have said Paul McCann is not to be thought about in their pre-season, previews and all that kind of stuff. I think he's had a little bit of an injury setback, unfortunately. Time will tell how serious that is or whatever, but it's another period of frustration, I think, for Paxton Paul McCall holders. Jesus Ferreira, I think, is probably the most exciting guy most people are getting behind at the moment. Under 23 eligible striker, can play wide, can play as a 10, could even get a transfer alongside guys like Ricardo Pepe and Thomas Roberts or whatever. But Jesus Ferreira, definitely seems to be, from the Dallas team, probably one of the most exciting guys you could be picking up at this point. So in terms of, you know, Jesus Ferreira, is that someone you're excited about, Martin?
I think the talent is there. Obviously, I'm not sure he would be like a full-time starter if all the players are fit, because they kind of just play with like, I guess they have Yara up front, and then ideally I think he would be like a forward. So, but like he said, he has some versatility. So with Pomykal out, maybe they put him like on the wing. So yes, I think he could be a player that could get a move abroad. I wouldn't like have like huge expectations from him. Another player is also like Pepe. He's popped up with a few goals, and he's a nice young player as well. So they have, like we said, a few good young players coming through. But with, like I said, with all these young players, you just don't know. Like there's so many like things that could happen. Like they could have a good game, and they could go on a run of bad games. So it's like that the talent is there with the team. It's just how consistent they're going to be with all the young players for me.
Of course, yeah. And Pepe, again, the little I've seen of him, he seems like a born finisher. You know, when the goals he scores, when you look at them, they're, you know, a few, I think one or two of them might have been tap-ins or whatever, but he does strike the ball cleanly. He does hit the ball like a finisher, which is always encouraging to see. Dallas, they've also signed Freddy Vargas, who we were talking about before recording. So it's a 22-year-old Venezuelan coming up the road. They've also got another guy I'm looking at here, Jader O'Brien, who looks to be Colombian, who's just come in as a forward as well. Tanner Tessman, you've mentioned. Thomas Roberts. There's a lot of prospects around this club, so time will tell how well they'll do exactly. As I look at their opening fixtures for the season, I'll just have a wee peek at it now. Let me see what I think. So they start off with, we've got the Rapids, then the Earthquakes, then Portland and Houston, Minnesota and RSL before the Rapids again. So I actually like that first 6 fixtures. So we've got Colorado and San Jose. They're games that they'll fancy themselves to do well in, definitely. Portland will be difficult, but Dallas are at home, so anything can happen. They've got Champions League also. Houston, I'm not a big fan of Houston, so I would expect Dallas to do well. Minnesota away could be tricky, and RSL and Dallas should be a Dallas win. So again, quite feasibly, I can maybe see them coming out with about 9 points from the first 6 games. And I started the season like that for young kids who are looking to gain confidence, look to get a good run in the team. That could be a lovely springboard to the season ahead.
Yeah, I think, yeah, like you said, again, this team they'll just want to keep there or thereabouts at the beginning of the season, and then just hopefully they'll become more cohesive. Once the youngsters get more playing time, hopefully they get a bit more consistency in play.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I say with consistency comes, consistency brings confidence, and the more confident players become, especially when they're younger, the more they can develop, and the more they can kind of push themselves on. After that little period of games, then it gets quite tough. They've got LAFC, they've got the Revs, Whitecaps, Galaxy, Portland, Colorado again, Galaxy again. So they really do get into the mire. Then it's Kansas and Seattle. The fixture list is quite unforgiving for some teams that are in this kind of situation, like Dallas and like we're chatting about before with Philly, perhaps, where there's not really a lot of room for error. If they mess up, if they haven't done their preparation pre-season, that will show quite quickly, and the results will go against them. So it's one of these ones. But these kind of teams, you do need to err on the side of the caution with some of the cards you're going big on, and understanding that some of these young guys, they are speculative. They might hit, they might not.
Yes,
definitely.
I mean, like Mora is like one of the goalkeepers that's going for quite a good price. I guess people are looking at his scores from last year, and he has pretty consistently good scorer for a goalkeeper. So I think he's going for up to like 0.8 to an E. So
I think a guy like this is going to actually be very useful in SoRare, because when you know the goalkeeper is going to be starting week in, week out, that can give you a lot of confidence to actually build your team around. And yeah, I know he's around that kind of 0.8 mark like you were saying, but unfortunately that's the kind of price of entry at the moment for a goalkeeper, and that's just, it is what it is. But yeah, Dallas should do well this season. I think we kind of both fancy they'll be thereabouts. Won't pull up any trees. They probably won't be at the bottom of the table picking up the wooden spoon. It's just really how big do the young prospects hit, and how many goals do they score really.